guys, thanks for being with me today. We are discussing Noah Presgrove and his autopsy. I am not a medical professional by all means, but I'm very determined to, as a lot of you are, to understand what his injuries mean. Especially since his cause of death came back as multiple blunt force injuries, and even though his manner of death is undetermined, his death is being classified as suspicious, and rightly so given his extensive horrific injuries. So today we will be looking into significant aspects of his autopsy, including other interesting factors. If you're new here, welcome guys. If you don't know who Noah Presgrove is, please read the description or Google his name. There is also a GoFundMe link for his family who is seeking justice for their young family member who was horrifically killed. Also, consider subscribing and giving a thumbs up. This is a small channel and I am here to be a voice for the victims.
Right here, his pants were folded up on that square mark.
His pants were there, his tooth was right there in that circle?
I believe so, yeah. And his body was here. And he was in the fetal position, facing that way.
Have you ever heard them say foul play is suspected?
I've heard suspected of foul play, suspicious death.
I ran over here, asked him if Noah was okay, and the semi-truck driver had his hands on Noah like this, and so I just kind of, and I could just tell, you know, that he was not okay. He was laying on his side, and he just had his eyes closed, you know, and he had a cut on his forehead. Like, it wasn't just like terrible, like, I mean, it was just a cut on his forehead. The top of his hair was scraped off his head, and there was blood on his ears. 100% in my heart think that he was hit. I think he got hit on the top of his head by a semi, and that shoe that was on good just stayed on. I don't know. I can't explain it.
Those interviews were conducted late April 2024, and this messenger conversation between Jack and I think it's Justin Roy was done in September, okay, just weeks after Noah's death. And it looks like Jack's being questioned here, like, why was Noah's body curled up? He says, what do you mean? He looked like he was just laying on his side with a question mark. And then he's talking about he had shoes on. So he's mentioning that before Noah's been found on the road, he's had shoes, plural, okay, and just some wrestling shorts. He says they're loose-fitting shorts, and that's, you know, why they've come off him. And he says he only had one shoe on, too. All I know is whatever happened to him happened on the road. The tooth, his necklace, you could see where his head hit the ground. How does he know his head hit the ground? It's an interesting observation right there. This post was found on Facebook, one of the groups on Noah, and Lee Richardson says, so someone explained to me why his clothes were off of him. They were, right? Luana says, yes, he only had shoes on, probably because they were potential evidence, meaning the removal of clothing was probably because there was DNA, potential DNA on those. Stevie Howard, highlighted below, is the party host's mother, and she states that one shoe that was too small for him, which would have been the Hey Dude belonging to another party goer, was on him, and she says the other one was off, which would have been his Adidas. His own shoe was off him. This is what she's stating. Now, this could be second-hand information, or she knows information firsthand, maybe because she was either there, or there's photos showing things, we don't know yet. But it's just interesting to me that she's stating the one shoe and then Jack is stating the one shoe. They're aligning their stories together, which is interesting. And this was 24 weeks ago, okay? So I only screenshot this post yesterday. So this was 24 weeks ago that Stevie's written this. Now, when we look at News Nation's interview, that was 6 to 7 months later after Jack's messenger conversation with Justin Roy. So weeks after Noah's death, even learning through the news and everything that Noah would have been found with two shoes on his body, he's still telling News Nation 6 to 7 months later and even weeks later in a conversation to Justin Roy that Noah only had one shoe on. Stevie Howard coming through 24 weeks ago saying one shoe. So what is it about this one shoe that's significant that seems to be imprinted in their brain? This tells me that When Noah was deceased, he had one shoe on. Whatever happened to him, for some reason, there's that one shoe. And it's interesting because his other shoe has never been found, apparently. So the Adidas shoe, the missing shoe, is a mystery. And when another partygoer, who I'll call Kay, was jolted awake at 5:15 a.m. by Jack banging the door, he heard Jack announce that Noah was deceased. Kay quickly woke up the other boys, could only find one of his shoes and left. A mile down the road, Kay saw Noah's body beside a semi-truck, a service vehicle and Jack's truck. Noah was wearing mismatched shoes, his own Adidas and Kay's missing Hey Dude shoe. He was lying chest down with his hips and legs on their side facing the grass and one arm behind his back. And Kay noticed he was wearing black shorts. After about 2 to 5 minutes, Kay and the others were told to leave. When Noah's body was received by the coroner, he was wearing only an unmatched pair of shoes. The right shoe was a Hey Dude brand with a speed lacing shoelace containing minimal debris and grass inside, while the left shoe was his Adidas brand with a regular tied shoelace containing more debris and grass inside. This is the interesting part, there was no observable damage to the shoes. According to Chisholm and Turvey, authors of Crime Reconstruction 2011, they state that in traffic accidents, the bottoms of shoes will have parallel scratches, indicating the direction and location of the injuries to the body and the foot on which the victim was standing. If these scratches are missing, either the accident was at very low speed or the body was dumped at this location. And as we know, the autopsy states there was no observable damage to his shoes or apparently the white shorts that were found on the roadside by his body. Now, when we look at this where it says either the accident was at very low speed, now if this was an accident at very low speed, he wouldn't have had all of those horrific injuries to his body. So this tells me he was dumped at this location. While driving along Highway 81 early on Monday, September 4th, 2023, Tyler Hardy and another man saw a body lying on the side of the road. 3 911 calls were made soon after, one at 5:43 a.m, another at 5:53 a.m, and a short 20-second static call in between. It is believed the semi-truck driver called first, followed by Hardy. During Hardy's call, the dispatcher asked if he'd called earlier, mentioning 2 prior calls, including one from another Tyler. Hardy said no, but police suspect the static call may have come from the same number. In June 2024, with the Daily Mail, Hardy shared that he saw Noah lying by the road naked in a fetal position with mismatched shoes, blood pooled by his head, and white shorts about 25 feet away were on the road. In another account, he denied that Noah was laying in a fetal position and that he was laying on his right side, legs bent, back facing the road. Hardy also mentioned that a little later, Jack Newton arrived and confirmed it was his friend Noah. He then says the Terral, Fire and Jefferson County sheriffs showed up. The partygoer Kay, on the other hand, soon realised something was wrong when he learned that Noah had been found naked and in a different position than what he had witnessed around 5:21 a.m. Kay felt that Noah's body had been tampered with. Tyler Hardy, however, swears he was the first to arrive at Noah's body, found him naked, and insists that nobody tampered with him. Tyler may have felt that Kay was accusing him and the other truck driver of interfering with the body. However, Kay is adamant that he saw a service truck at the scene. Members of the Army Page Facebook group believe both are correct, suggesting that they simply did not see each other because they arrived at different times. Meanwhile, Tyler denies seeing Kay and the boys in a Jeep and claims he wasn't driving a service truck but a Ford F-150 pickup. There was also a semi-truck at the scene both times, and it's unclear whether they were the same one. So according to Hardy, it was just him, the semi-truck driver and Jack that were there with Noah until the VFFs and sheriffs arrived. Carter Coombs, Jack's girlfriend at the time, I think they're engaged now, stated that Kay's timeline of 5:15 was wrong. That Jack had actually ran into her bedroom and buried his head into her bed, saying Noah was gone. He stayed for a minute and said, "I got to get back to Noah, I can't leave him alone there." There's a lot of people that have really picked up on the word alone, because when you're alone, there's no one else around you. So if it was at 5:15 that he has stated that, it would be true that Noah was alone, because at that stage, as far as we know, Kay and the boys weren't out there until 5:21 a.m. And the two 911 callers hadn't arrived till about 5:40 a.m. When Kay arrived with the three other boys at the scene at 5:21 a.m, he was only there for 2 to 5 minutes before they were ordered to leave. So they went back to the house. So Caden and the boys possibly get back to the house around 5:30 a.m, and Caden states that he sees the girls in the living room crying, and they ask him and the boys, is Noah really dead? And they confirm that yes, he is. And we know about the Snapchat that Jasmine had posted at 3:41 a.m, or timestamped as 3:41 a.m, saying, well, Noah is missing. Even more interesting when her own mother gets on Facebook and says, hey, Jazz called me between 5:45 a.m. and 6 a.m, which is around the time that these 911 calls have come in. And apparently Jack was the one that Tyler saw first and only on scene, not long after he and the other truck driver called 911. So at what point was Noah alone? Because according to Kay, at 5:21 a.m, a service truck and semi were right by Noah's side. And by 6 a.m, two 911 callers were by Noah's side. So looking at time frames, then it makes sense that they've come back around 5:30 and a phone call from Jasmine has been made to her mother between 5:45 and 6 a.m. Meanwhile, Jack was still at the scene with Noah, with a semi-truck and a service truck that Kay had seen with the boys. What was happening between 5:30 and 5:43 a.m. when the first 911 call was made? Where was Jack? Because Tyler states that Jack turned up not long after the 911 calls were made. What happened between 5:30 and 5:43 a.m. when the first 911 call was made? What were the semi and service truck drivers doing during that time? Did Jack come back to the house to grab the white shorts? As it was rumoured, the 911 callers reported seeing a kid jump out of the passenger side of a vehicle, run straight to Noah's body, almost as if he knew exactly where to go, even though the trucks had been shielding the body from view. The kid then scooped up the black shorts and replaced them with the white ones. This theory connects with rumours about a leaked video from a private investigator showing Noah's body being tampered with and his black shorts being removed. Allegedly, this footage captured 4 men, 2 in plain clothes, 1 firefighter and possibly a police officer in uniform at the scene, recorded by someone present. If this account is accurate, it's possible these individuals left the scene, accidentally leaving the black shorts behind by Noah. This might explain why Jack or someone else supposedly returned to the scene to switch out the shorts, but by then the 911 callers had already arrived. Perhaps the person who ran to Noah's body mistook the new vehicles on the scene for the original ones, or decided to take the risk hoping to avoid detection by acting quickly. There's also been word that Jack had tried to put the white shorts back in his truck. This was when the VFFs arrived at 6:15 and they ordered him to put them back on the road. Maybe he did this because as the authorities were about to arrive, he may have been panicking, realising that those were his shorts that were going to link him to this death. And it seems that whoever he was with at 5:21 a.m. had ordered him to go back to the house to retrieve the white shorts. That's the word going around anyway. That could have been the time he ran into Carter's room and told her he can't leave Noah out there alone, and he's gone and ran into the lounge room, banged the door and woken the boys. And he may have had white shorts under his shirt at that stage, put them in his truck and drove down with Kay and the boys to Noah. And then the boys have come back to the house. What's Jack done in that time, we don't know. We do know he's left the scene because by the time the 911 callers arrive, there is nobody by Noah's body. Jack comes running up apparently and switches the shorts. We're about to hear one of the 911 calls. And Tyler's basically explaining that he's gone past this body on the road thinking at first it was a deer. He almost hit it. He's turned around to come back and look, he's noticed Noah, who's laying there naked. But it's interesting how he explains to the dispatcher that there's a piece of clothing laying on the road now.
911, what is your emergency?
Yes, ma'am. I was driving to work. I'm south of Terral, or north of Terral, south of Ryan.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure there's somebody laying dead along the road. They look naked. I'm staying back.
Okay, I just had 2 calls on that, and I have a deputy headed that way.
All right, well, I'm
And
sitting here blocking the road.
Oh, are you there waiting? Okay.
Because he's the body's laying right on a white line.
Oh, it is a boy. He's naked, and he's laying on the white line. He's naked.
I turned around because I just about hit it because there's a deer run across the road, and I'm like, first I thought it was a deer, and I was talking to a guy I work with. I'm like, I don't think that's a deer.
Yeah, that's what my first caller said. Thought it was a deer, and then when he looked back and he said, no, there's no way that's a deer.
No, and it actually looks like there's a piece of clothing maybe laying in the middle of the road now. I don't want to get too close.
Jeremy right now. No, this is another 911 call that's looking at it.
Oh, she's already been in touch with Jeremy.
Okay. Yeah, Jeremy's going to head that way.
Jeremy's heading that way. She's on the
Okay.
All right.
Jack's dad, Caleb, says that he got the call from Jack around 6:05 a.m. Caleb says he's picked up his dad and he's driven straight to the scene, and when he's arrived there were several law enforcement and fire and rescue on the job. On a Facebook group, Caleb states it takes him about 40 minutes from his house to reach Terral, which means he would have been there about 6:40, 6:45 a.m. going by his timeline. The Under-Sheriff Jimmy Williams said there were only 5 people when he arrived at 6:18. He saw the 2 911 callers and Jack, and 2 Terral Rural Volunteer firefighters, including its chief. I'm thinking that's Cash Allsup, or it could be Bub, who's known to be the party host's grandfather, and they arrived at 6:15. When Jimmy Williams arrived, he saw Noah laying on his side. He said he wouldn't say he was in a fetal position. He said his legs were straight and his arms not tucked into his body. Yet 25 minutes earlier, 911 caller Hardy saw Noah laying on his right side with his legs bent. Williams said that the white shorts were folded near Noah's body. It is believed the shorts were retrieved and folded by one of the volunteer firefighters in the few minutes between Hardy's call and Williams arriving to prevent vehicles running them over. And Hardy recalled that no one touched the body between when he saw it and when police arrived. 6 minutes later, it stated that Sheriff Wilson arrives at 6:24 a.m. He sees Noah naked laying on his back with mismatched shoes, and white shorts are present, but he observes no damage. He says that he sees a couple of teeth laying beside Noah. Now, as we know in the autopsy, it was stated that half a broken tooth or part of a broken tooth was found beside Noah, several feet away, consistent with a molar tooth. We do know also that Noah had remnants of teeth in his mouth. So, did somebody turn him on his back before Sheriff Wilson arrived, and whilst doing so, did a part of another tooth fall out and land on the road beside Noah? Then what happened to that tooth? What time did law enforcement arrive when they painted the circle around the one tooth on the road? In one interview, Dalen states that when he's arrived, he sees Caleb, Jack, and the county sheriff Jeremy Wilson there. He doesn't say anything about seeing 911 callers or the volunteer firefighters. Doesn't mean they weren't there, but he doesn't mention that in his interview. Tyler states that he and the truck driver, the 2 911 callers, actually left at 10 a.m. Dalen reports that he sees Noah laying with a sheet over him in a fetal position facing towards the grass. In May 2024, WFLA report that Dalen had stated that Noah's teeth were sitting there next to his face. Now, I don't know if Dalen actually cited these teeth considering that there was a sheet over Noah. Whether this was secondhand information relayed back to him from someone, I don't know. Whether this is just something that the report has just put in, we don't really know. But it is interesting, it's consistent with Jeremy Wilson's account of there being teeth, plural, on the road by Noah's body. Yet there was a very interesting conversation between Noah's aunt, Robin Smith, and Jack's father, Caleb Newton, about an interview that Caleb had conducted with the family PI, Kathy, where he is said to have admitted to picking up one of Noah's teeth whilst he was there on scene that day. On the Justice for Noah page, Caleb wrote, "The tooth that was on the road was not moved that I seen. I watched a police officer circle it with white chalk. Robin says, then why did you tell Kathy the story about you picking up the tooth? I'm confused. I listened to that interview and that is what you said. Caleb said, I never said that. I told her I pointed out a tooth to the police. I would not have picked that up ever. Robin said, I listened to the recording. I wrote down your statement while listening to it. That is exactly what I heard. At what point did Caleb pick up the tooth or partial tooth? Dalen mentioned there were teeth sitting next to Noah's face. He may have received this information second-hand, considering there was a sheet covering Noah's body. Dalen likely arrived around 7:30 a.m. Williams stated that he left the scene at 8:18 a.m. when the OHP arrived to block off the road. The 911 callers said they left around 10 a.m. It's still unclear when Caleb, Jack, the Sheriff Wilson or the volunteer firefighters departed the scene. But based on the timeline, it seems that Caleb allegedly removed the tooth sometime between 7:30, when Dalen reported knowledge of teeth by Noah's face, and 8:18 a.m. when the OHP arrived. Because in his conversation on Facebook with Robin, Caleb said that he witnessed OHP circling the spot where one tooth was. So let's go over the timeline quickly. At 5:15 a.m, Kay is woken by Jack at the door saying Noah is dead. By 5:21 a.m, Kay and 3 other boys are at the scene. Kay sees Noah laying chest down, hips and legs to the side, wearing black shorts and mismatched shoes. He does not see white shorts. Between 5:43 a.m. to 5:53 a.m, 911 callers Tyler and the semi-truck driver arrive. Tyler sees Noah naked in a fetal position or on his side, legs bent, with mismatched shoes, facing grass. Jack turns up a little while later and Tyler sees white shorts on the road. At 5:53 a.m, Jack's texting his father Caleb about bringing a hat for fishing as his was messed with the night before. Between 5:45 to 6 a.m, Jazz calls her mother Renee about Noah. Between 6 and 6:05 a.m, Jack calls his father Caleb about Noah. At 6:15 a.m, 2 volunteer firefighters, including the chief, arrive. Tyler, truck driver and Jack are still there. At 6:18 a.m, Under Sheriff Jimmy Williams arrives. He sees Noah laying on his side, legs straight, folded white shorts nearby. 6:24 a.m, Sheriff Wilson arrives, sees Noah naked, laying on his back with mismatched shoes. He sees no damage to the white shorts present. It is believed that between 6:40 to 6:45 a.m, Caleb arrives with his father. According to Renee Milan's timeline, she arrives at the scene to check on Jack around 6:40, and she is soon after told to leave the scene. Around 7 a.m, Dalen, Noah's brother, is called and he drives with his father 30 minutes to Terral. I'm assuming they get there around 7:30 and Dalen sees Noah laying in a fetal position facing towards the grass with a sheet over his body. 8:17 a.m, Sheriff Williams leaves the scene and I'm pretty sure this is where OHP takes over and blocks the road from all traffic. Around 9 a.m, Dalen and his father are relocated. 10 a.m, the 911 callers leave the scene. Noah's body was examined by the ME at 1 p.m. September 5th, 2023. It was stated that the rigor mortis was complete and that the pink-purple livor mortis was present posteriorly, fixed, except in areas exposed to pressure. So in layman's terms, it means the blood had pooled and settled in the back, in brackets posterior, parts of the body, indicating that Noah may have been lying on his back for an extended period after death. Since livor mortis becomes fixed after several hours, this suggests that his body may have remained in that position long enough for the discoloration to set permanently, except for areas exposed to pressure from hard surfaces such as the ground or the floor, which would prevent blood from pooling there. What's strange about this is that Noah was initially seen lying chest down, but then multiple people reported him as being on his side on the road from at least around 5:20 a.m. until at least 10 a.m. when the last person observed him in that position. Noah was picked up by the medical examiner at 7 p.m, but it's unclear what position his body was in at that time or if anyone had moved him after 10 a.m. This raises questions about whether his body was repositioned at some point, especially considering the fixed livor mortis observed posteriorly, which suggests the body had been in a different position long enough for the discoloration to set. So at what point was Noah lying on his back for a significant amount of time? We know that Sheriff Wilson observed Noah on his back when he arrived at 6:24 a.m, but by around 7:30 a.m. when Dalen arrived, Noah was back on his side. This hour, in my opinion, wouldn't be sufficient for livor mortis to become fully fixed, especially considering that Noah had been lying on his side both before and after he was observed on his back. For livor mortis to become fixed on his back, Noah would likely have had to remain in that position for several hours without being moved. It's important to note, though, that livor mortis can be accelerated by several factors, including environmental conditions and the state of the body. This includes heat temperatures, if a person's physically active or has exerted themselves before dying, if their body is left undisturbed or has been moved around, if the body's dehydrated, and body size, whether they're a lean, smaller person or if they've got more fatty tissue. Now, we know that Noah was a lean, athletic young man. We don't know what physical activity he may have been doing right before death. It was stated that he had walked off from the house and that at some point there was an ATV accident and that he had been showered. Whether these happened or not, we don't really know yet. In Terral, September 4th, between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m, the temperature was 76 degrees before gradually rising to 89 degrees by 9 a.m. By 2 to 3 p.m, it had peaked at 105 degrees, so that was the highest it had been that day. After 6 p.m, the temperature gradually cools down, and by 7 p.m, when Noah is picked up, it is 67 degrees. I asked good old ChatGPT if Noah died around 4 a.m. as his best friend states, and it was 76 degrees, and if he was laying on his back until being relocated on the road at, say, 5 a.m, given that he's naked and his body size is lean, would livor mortis become fixed, considering he was placed chest down first by about 5:20 and then repositioned on his side at, say, 5:30 a.m? The answer was the development of livor mortis would have been influenced by both the cooler temperature and the time spent in one position. So if he was initially on his back at 4 a.m, at a temperature around 76 degrees, livor mortis would have begun, but at a slower pace than it would be at higher temperatures. And livor mortis occurs 20 or 30 minutes from death. Okay, that's the process it starts. As he was lying on his back, blood would initially begin pooling towards his back and posterior areas, which could take on a purple or pinkish discoloration as time passed. If he was moved to the road by 5 a.m, and repositioned chest down by 5:20 a.m, and then on his side by 5:30 a.m, the livor mortis pooling pattern would be disrupted. Since livor mortis becomes fixed in 6 to 12 hours on average, this repositioning could delay the fixation process because the blood would have to redistribute with each position change. The fact that Noah has a lean body would potentially allow for quicker pooling of blood due to less resistance in tissue, but being naked and in cooler, early morning temperatures would keep the process slower. Now we're looking at time and temperature consideration. With temperatures starting to rise after dawn and peaking later in the day, the warm environment would accelerate fixation. However, with frequent repositioning early on, livor mortis might not have a chance to fully fix in any specific position, back, chest or side, until later in the day. It would be interesting to know what position the ME found Noah in at 7 p.m. when he collected him from the highway. It seems like there are two likely scenarios in that either Noah had died much earlier on Sunday night and was lying on his back for an extended period, perhaps even a few hours before being positioned on the road, and this scenario would align with the fixed posterior lividity that was found. If he had been laying undisturbed on his back before being moved, his livor mortis would naturally fix in that position. If he was later repositioned to his back, say after 10 a.m., this was a time when temperatures were high enough to accelerate the fixation process, and this could have led to lividity fixing posteriorly due to this final positioning and the rise in temperature throughout the day. So if this happened after 10 a.m. when the 911 caller left, it might explain how it became fixed despite earlier reports of him lying on his side. If Noah had been lying on his side from around 5:50 a.m. to 10 a.m., livor mortis would indeed likely start developing on the side of his body, particularly in areas against the ground. This early pooling would likely continue to accumulate blood in these areas as long as he remained in that position. If Noah was then moved to his back sometime after 10 a.m., the areas where blood had initially pooled could still appear darker due to initial lividity, but might not be fully fixed yet, depending on how long he remained in each position and how warm the temperatures were. In an autopsy, the coroner would potentially observe a dual lividity pattern, evidence of blood pooling along the side from his position between 5:50 a.m. and 10 a.m, and more extensive pooling along the back if he had been repositioned there long enough for blood to continue pooling and fixed there by the time of examination. So the warmer temperatures would accelerate the fixing process. And if Noah had been on his back for several hours after 10 a.m, posterior lividity could become more prominent and fixed by 7 p.m. However, if the lividity along his side had already partially fixed before repositioning, these marks could still be visible, indicating multiple body positions before reaching full fixation. Partial lividity could start to develop on Noah's side between 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. During this time, temperatures rose steadily, reaching around 89 degrees by 9 a.m. The increasing warmth would accelerate livor mortis, especially given the body's lean and unclothed state. As blood pooling starts within 30 minutes to 2 hours post-mortem, the position on his side would encourage the blood to gravitate there, which is really interesting, considering the livor mortis was posteriorly fixed. The coroner stated that rigor mortis was complete, and rigor mortis is the stiffening of muscles that occurs after death caused by chemical changes in muscle fibres. It begins between 2 to 4 hours after death and peaks at about 12 hours and lasts roughly 24 to 36 hours before muscles begin to relax as decomposition starts. Now, in Noah's case, if he died between 3 and 4 a.m, his lean build and warm outdoor temperatures likely accelerated this rigor mortis onset, making it fully established by the time the coroner saw him. Warmer conditions and his athletic body type could have led to faster muscle stiffening, fitting the observed state of complete rigor mortis. In Noah's autopsy, there are numerous accounts reported of abrasions, otherwise known as grazes, all over his body. And then we have an abraded avulsion laceration. So we're going to get into what the difference is between abraded lacerations and avulsion and contusions and hemorrhaging and all the things that have been mentioned in the autopsy that we need to know in layman's terms, a lot of us. So let's have a look. So abrasions, also known as grazes, is skin scraped or rubbed off due to friction, often seen in accidents like falls or abrasions from rough surfaces. According to the Accident Claims Advice website, there are first, second and third degree abrasions depending on the type of injury sustained. The first degree, only the epidermis is damaged, such as if you fall off a bike or graze your arm against a rough wall. Second degree, both the outer and second layers of skin are damaged with little bleeding. This could happen from being ejected from a vehicle or sports injuries, or if you're riding a bike and are hit by a car and you fall down. The third degree, the most severe, where the subcutaneous layer of skin is damaged along with the outer layers, often caused by high-speed accidents. So if you're ejected out of a vehicle that's going fast, or if you've been hit by a vehicle that's going fast, or if you're cycling, say, on a bike and get hit by a vehicle and you're cycling at high speed and then you come off your bike, that's what that would be, a more painful, severe abrasion. The fact that the coroner only wrote the abrasions in the autopsy doesn't give us much insight into the severity of the abrasions or what likely caused them, especially considering Noah had abrasions all over his body. So abrasions on his head could be a lot deeper than, say, on his back. Let's take a look at all the abrasions the coroner noted. He mentions that some are linear, varicized, round, or irregular patterns. Linear means straight, okay, or nearly straight, often indicating contact with an edge or narrow object. So they can come from sliding or scraping along something like asphalt or concrete. Round abrasions obviously have a circular shape, which may indicate a more localized impact with a rounded object or surface. Irregular patterns don't have a defined shape, often seen with rough or uneven surfaces. These abrasions could result from dragging or brushing against objects with uneven textures. Subjacent may mean beneath the surface. So varicized pinpoint can mean an abrasion varying in size, and pinpoint indicates very small dot-like abrasions, potentially from a textured or fine pointed surface. Lateral means to the side, anterior to the front, and posterior to the back. So just looking at the left side of Noah's body and head, his head and face showed subjacent abrasions on the lateral left eyebrow, which means the side of his eyebrow beneath the surface there was an abrasion, corner of his left eye and left cheek, and the front of his left ear with associated lacerations, and an abrasion to the left side of his neck. His mouth had white abrasions on the midline mucosa of the upper lip and lacerations on the midline mucosa of the lower lip. He had a laceration on the left surface of his tongue at the ventral surface, so meaning the underside of his tongue. So this could result from a direct blow or trauma to the mouth, such as from a fall, impact, or a sharp object coming into contact with the tongue. It could indicate a violent or forceful impact to his face or head, potentially from blunt trauma such as a blow to the mouth or head, which could cause the victim to bite their tongue or sustain direct injury to that area. He had abrasions on the left upper back, left shoulder and left side of the torso with combined patterns linear, pinpoint, round and irregular. There was a cluster of tan horizontal, linear and interrupted abrasions on the left abdomen. So a cluster obviously means a group of abrasions that are close together, and tan is just the colour of what it was, so it may have started healing or scabbing, or there might have been drying of the skin. Horizontal linear describes the abrasions as straight and parallel to the horizon, indicating a direction that likely resulted from the contact with the surface or object moving across the abdomen horizontally. Interrupted means these abrasions are not continuous but are broken or segmented, meaning they may look like dashed lines or separate marks in a line rather than one continuous scratch. This could imply contact with a surface that had gaps or breaks. So this pattern may point to repeated contact with a rough or textured surface, like sliding across a ridged or interrupted surface. It could suggest an impact from an object that caused multiple abrasions in a horizontal alignment. So this kind of injury can often be consistent with dragging, scraping, or rolling across a rough surface. On his left buttock, he had varicized pinpoint to round to irregular patterns. He had abrasions on his left elbow, anterior lateral left leg, meaning front and side of the left leg, and his left knee. There were healed abrasions on the back of the left hand, fifth knuckle, and the middle phalanx, meaning bone, of the fifth finger, posterior left ankle, meaning at the back of his left ankle, medial heel, meaning to the center of his heel of the left foot, and dorsum of the left foot, meaning on the surface of his left foot, and dorsum of the left foot, meaning the upper surface of his left foot. Now looking to the right side of his body, his head and neck showed abrasions on the back of his head behind his right ear, with additional abrasions on the posterior right side of the neck. He had abrasions on the dorsum, so the top of his right foot and the side of his right ankle, and he had a contusion on the right heel, which is a bruise. There were linear and irregular abrasions on the front of the right arm and forearm, abrasions on the front and back of the right knee, healed abrasions on the back of the right hand, involving the third to fifth knuckles and the middle phalanges of the index to fifth fingers, meaning phalanges means bones, plural, as well as the distal bone of the middle finger, meaning the third bone of the middle finger. There were scabs present on his right upper lip and palmar surfaces of the right thumb and left index finger. He had a round healing ulcer on the back of his right thigh, and there was drying of palmar surfaces of the hands. Palmar meaning the palm or the front surface of the hand. So I asked ChatGPT. I said that the healed or healing or scabbed abrasions could be from activities done a day or days prior. And I said, tell me what kind of scenario could cause all these abrasions. I said, it is said that the boys at the party were hitting things, running into cardboard, wrestling, and there was word of an ATV flip over either on the Sunday night or early hours Monday morning around 3 a.m. This was the answer from Chat. It said the multiple abrasions found on Noah's body, including those described as linear, pinpoint, and irregular, could result from several factors, particularly roughhousing, wrestling, or accidents. Abrasions could stem from rough activities like wrestling or play, which might involve a lot of contact with hard or rough surfaces, the ground, objects, or each other. The linear and irregular abrasions could be caused by friction with skin scraping against surfaces. The variety of abrasion types, pinpoint, round, irregular, suggests that different types of contact and pressures occurred across his body, possibly due to being dragged or coming into contact with multiple surfaces at different angles. And there was known to be what are called stickers in the grass. So we call them prickles here in Australia. So those could be responsible for the pinpoint, like dot-like patterns. The fact that these were linear and varying in size, as well as round to irregular abrasions involving his left upper back, shoulder, back of his left arm and left side of his torso means perhaps that at some point there was pressure on the left side of his body. So say if he was laying down on the grass and someone's wrestling with him or fighting with him or putting more pressure on the left, maybe he's on his side at this stage whilst this pressure's being applied to him. There could be the moving around if you're wrestling someone or being dragged. That could be causing irregular patterns in those abrasions. If it was an ATV accident, this could explain many of the abrasions. A flip over can lead to a range of injuries, as well as contusions, and obviously more severe injuries can be done due to the force of the impact. The abrasions and contusions could be located on the extremities, which is the limbs and areas where the body made contact with the ground or other objects during the flip. The abrasions on his abdomen, arms and legs, as well as those on the back, could be linked to such an incident. The presence of scabs, healed abrasions and dried skin could point to prior injuries sustained in earlier physical activity, either from the same evening or from activities done in days leading up to his death. It's not uncommon for young individuals involved in physical play or sports to sustain abrasions that heal over a few days. And other possible causes, it states, is while the ATV flip and wrestling appear to be strong candidates, the abrasions in various areas, including his face, neck and extremities, could suggest a variety of interactions or movements, such as falling, being struck, or even being dragged. Most people are interested in the 4x2-inch wound to the top left of his head, which the coroner wrote as an abraded avulsion laceration. Now, abraded is an injury where the top layer of skin is scraped or worn away, typically due to friction with a rough surface. This could be a result of something like being dragged across a rough surface, but an avulsion is a more severe injury where tissue such as skin, fat, or even muscle is forcibly torn away from its normal attachment. In this case, it suggests that a portion of Noah's skin or scalp has been torn off. A laceration is a deep cut or tear in the skin, often with irregular edges. It is usually caused by blunt force or sharp objects that slice through the skin. But putting it all together, an abraded avulsion laceration on the top of the head means that the skin was scraped away, torn off, and cut or torn in a deep, irregular manner. Lacerations can be caused by blows from blunt objects such as a hammer, a whipped pistol, a rod, a toe cap of heavy footwear, or a fist. Other lacerations are produced by impact from vehicles or by a fall to the ground. The abraded avulsion laceration wound on Noah's head had a fish-like appearance, which could be caused by several types of blunt force trauma, apparently. Objects with irregular, rounded or uneven surfaces may create this type of injury. For example, a hitting object with a round or oval shape might cause the laceration to have curved or angular edges similar to the fish-like description. These can range from a significant impact from a blunt object like a rock, brick, fist, or heavy tool, to a heavy object falling onto the head, such as debris from a building, a large item, or even machinery, could cause this type of injury. These types of objects may cause the skin and underlying tissues to tear away, creating a ragged, irregular, fish-like pattern. Where the edges are pulled and torn at an angle. Also scraping or dragging if the victim's head was scraped along a rough surface such as concrete, gravel, or asphalt. The friction could create both an abrasion and avulsion in the shape described. Being struck by a moving vehicle could cause this large irregular scalp wound. If the surface of the vehicle or parts of it, such as the bumper, side mirror, or roof, could strike the head. This could occur also if the victim was knocked down and dragged, or if they hit the ground with a certain amount of force. I asked ChatGPT if an abraded avulsion laceration wound could be caused by a golf club. If the club's surface or edge scraped the skin upon impact, creating an abraded area where the skin was scraped or roughened, it could. The force of the blow could cause an avulsion by partially tearing skin or tissue from the scalp, and a laceration by splitting the skin due to blunt force trauma. The club's shape or angle of impact might also contribute to a wound with irregular or fish-like edges. A 4-inch by 2-inch abraded avulsion laceration would create a lot of blood loss, you would think, especially because the bone was exposed. But other factors may contribute to minimal blood loss, such as crushed tissues, and internal bleeding, or coagulation because the blood had pooled inside the body. Noah had bleeding under and above his skull and around his brain, coupled with skull fractures, suggesting significant trauma and internal bleeding. The skull fractures can cause blood to pool within the layers around the brain, often due to ruptured blood vessels, which can lead to dangerous pressure on brain tissue. In cases with both internal bleeding and fractures, visible external bleeding may sometimes be minimal if blood primarily collects internally around the injury sites. Noah had internal bleeding around his heart, chest, and abdomen. Once the heart stops bleeding, that decreases blood pressure and limits external bleeding. There are people that believe Noah had died at another location to the road he was found on and was washed down to wash away blood from the head wound at another location, as there wasn't much blood at the scene where his body was found. I asked ChatGPT, would an ME be able to see on the wound or on his body telltale signs of this? Would washing a wound reduce or stop bleeding? The answer was, if Noah's body was moved after death and his head wound was washed to reduce visible blood, an ME could identify certain indicators suggesting this. The wound might lack expected blood flow patterns, show diluted or washed away blood, or be cleaner than nearby injuries or abrasions, suggesting external interference. If Noah had already experienced significant blood loss or clotting due to injuries, the wound may not have bled much further when moved. Noah suffered major head trauma, with hemorrhaging and skull fractures. There was extensive bleeding both underneath the scalp and within the skull. Blood pooled beneath the skin in multiple regions, including the top, back, sides and front. Additionally, there was serious internal bleeding inside his skull. This included clotted blood pressing on the back portion of the brain around 20 millimeters thick, and bleeding around the brain itself in the space between the brain and its protective layers. The brain suffered from swelling and significant injuries. These included tears to the left side of the brain, as well as critical structures like the brainstem, which connects the brain to the spinal cord and controls essential life functions. The injuries affected areas of the brainstem, including the midbrain, pons and medulla, along with nearby blood vessels. And he had an injury involving the left temporalis muscle, which is located over the temple area on the left side of the head. This muscle plays a crucial role in chewing and helps in moving the jaw. And the trauma caused a tear and bleeding in this muscle, adding to the overall extent of the injuries. Noah had multiple fractures present in his skull. On the left side, there were breaks in the bones where the parietal, which is the top side, temporal, the side, and frontal bones meet. There was a major hinge-type fracture across the base of the skull, and this fracture ran from the right side across the central base and continued to the left, involving structures near the brain's base. Additional fractures were present in the occipital bone, located at the back of the skull, near the large opening where the spinal cord enters the brain. There was also air in both his cranial cavity and spinal cord, which are extremely rare conditions only caused by massive head trauma. I asked chat what could cause a temporalis muscle to lacerate and hemorrhage, and it said a direct impact, such as a strong direct blow to the side of the head, like from a fall, a vehicle accident or an assault, can create enough force to tear the temporalis muscle, causing bleeding. Skull fractures in nearby bones, such as the temporal or parietal bones, can lead to muscle lacerations if the fractured bone edges puncture or tear the muscle tissue. Severe high-energy impacts that cause a hinge-type skull fracture across the base of the skull may result in extreme stretching, compression, or tearing of surrounding muscles, including the temporalis. Excessive force on the jaw or skull. Due to its role in jaw movement, a sudden extreme force that affects jaw alignment or movement may indirectly stress the temporalis muscle, potentially causing tears if the force is intense enough. I asked what could cause a hinge-type skull fracture. It says it's severe and an uncommon type of skull fracture, typically resulting from high-energy trauma. So in this injury, a fracture line travels horizontally across the base of the skull, essentially hinging it open, okay? High-impact vehicle accidents can create the significant force required to cause a hinge-type fracture, especially if the head hits a hard object or surface abruptly. Falls from a great height, such as from a building, ladder or cliff, and landing on the head, can generate enough force to split the skull at its base. Blunt force trauma, direct intense blows to the head, which could be involving heavy objects, industrial accidents, assaults with weapons like bats or heavy tools. Crushing injuries, being trapped under heavy machinery or objects that compress or crush the head, can produce the force required for a hinge fracture. I would think, though, that if Noah had fallen from a great height or was hit from a fast-moving vehicle, that his limbs would show fractures or breaks as well. Noah has suffered severe trauma to his neck where there was multiple fractures. The occipital condyles, which are the rounded structures at the base of the skull that connect to the spine, were fractured. This injury suggests extreme trauma to his neck. The C1 vertebra, also called the atlas, which supports the skull, had a fracture in the left lateral mass, causing misalignment. The C1 was displaced anteriorly, which means shifted forward, relative to the occipital condyle, which can disrupt the critical connection between the head and the spine, leading to internal decapitation. There were additional fractures to the C2, C6 and C7 vertebrae, which contribute to severe spinal damage. Pneumorachus refers to air within the spinal canal, typically indicating a fracture or trauma to the spine, allowing air to enter the normally sealed area. Noah suffered 10 broken ribs, including fractures to the upper ribs from the 1st to the 5th on the right side and 2nd to the 5th on the left. This is consistent with a high impact injury, such as a severe crash, apparently. The scapulae shoulder blades were fractured on both sides, likely due to the force of the trauma, and there were fractures to several thoracic vertebrae T4 to T9 and T11, and the transverse processes of T1 and T2, which contribute to severe spine and back injuries. Looking at these injuries to his ribs and his shoulder blades, I wonder if at some stage he was body slammed. He had damage to his internal organs. The right and left lungs had contusions, which is bruising, and lacerations, indicating serious damage to the chest from blunt trauma. The pulmonary vessels in the lungs, left atrium of the heart, spleen and cardia of the stomach were also lacerated. Blood in the chest cavity, which is otherwise known as hemothorax, was presented on both sides of the chest, with at least 700 ml of blood on the right and 500 ml on the left. He had at least 150 ml of blood around the heart, and there was blood in the abdominal cavity with at least 200 ml. He had soft tissue hemorrhage in the upper chest region, and there was air present in both sides of the chest, more so on the left than the right. Whatever happened to Noah, his body suffered tremendously, and I'm just hoping that he didn't. Let's have a look at the most likely scenario as to what could have caused all of this. So as we know, Noah attended an unsupervised party where alcohol was served to minors and tensions were high between a few partygoers, especially Noah and his best friend, Jack. Jack was jealous and angry apparently that Noah had become close to Carter, while Noah felt betrayed after learning that Jack had slept with one of his ex-girlfriends. This volatile mix of emotions, amplified by alcohol, likely contributed to their physical altercation. Afterward, Noah's belongings, including his golf clubs and other items, went missing. This was his wallet, his American flag tank top, no doubt his underwear if he was wearing underwear underneath those black shorts, any socks of his that he may have been wearing with sneakers, and his other Adidas shoe were missing. There were numerous inconsistencies in the accounts of what happened that night. Jack claimed to have gone to bed at different times and later said he wasn't even at the party. And this is what one of his Noah's cousins had actually stated, that Jack had told him it wasn't even there. While Carter allegedly wiped her phone, even erasing Jack's number and denying knowing Noah. It's also been stated at 3:15 a.m. all the kids at the party factory reset their phones. When Noah's body was found, it was clear something was not right. His shoes were mismatched and the lividity on his body was fixed posteriorly despite being on his side for hours, something that suggests Noah had been moved post-mortem. The lack of debris in his abrasions, which would typically result from an ATV accident, further questions the narrative of a vehicle-related incident. In fact, there also was no evidence of a hit and run, although Jack keeps pressing that theory, as do the party hosts and their families and friends. The presence of undamaged white shorts at the scene was another inconsistency. Also taking note that the shoes that Noah was found in had no observable damage, which usually happens after a vehicle-related accident. His pelvis, the lower part of his body, and his legs and his arms were not fractured. There would have been more rolling injuries if he had have been perhaps, struck from a vehicle or ejected from a vehicle. The fact that there is left side injury, concentration and abrasions on his body means he may have been positioned primarily on that side during an incident involving dragging or sliding rather than tumbling or rolling multiple times. If he had been thrown from or had fallen off an ATV, the injuries would likely be more dispersed on both sides, or there would be signs of impact and tumbling with possible fractures in his limbs as well. Also, what comes to mind is that he may have had someone on top of him wrestling with him. This could fall in line too with the fact that Noah's left Adidas shoe contained more debris and grass than the Hey Dude shoe he was wearing on his right foot. Especially if there was a physical struggle or wrestling on the ground, this could result in more contact between his left side and the ground surface. So in an altercation, it's common for one side of the body to pick up more debris if it's pressed down more heavily or consistently against grass and dirt, as could happen in a wrestling position or one-sided scuffle. The presence of black material, possibly asphalt, within broad abrasions on his upper back and left side might suggest he was in contact with a rough surface like a pavement. However, this type of debris was not found consistently across all wounds. If he had sustained these injuries in an off-road ATV accident, we would expect a more random scattering of debris, such as grass, gravel or dirt, in his abrasions, especially in areas that could not be easily cleaned, like crevices around his elbows or knees. Having black material in broad abrasions on his upper back makes you wonder. It is plausible that someone held him by his legs and dragged him backward with only his upper back and head scraping against the road. This would have happened post-mortem after he had received all of his injuries. Given the timeline and the tampering with evidence, it's more than likely that foul play was involved. It can't be said for certain, but it has been rumoured that Noah was aware that there were boys that wanted to jump him, and that he had asked one of his friends to have his back. But it wasn't Jack that he asked. And he had been desperately trying to get a lift home at this time. It's possible that Jack, after learning of Noah's attempts to leave the party, hid the ATV keys in an effort to prevent him from escaping. It was also stated that Noah, after having a shower, wanted to sleep in Avery's bed and that she refused because he had messed with her friend the night before. Apparently he called her bad names, and for all we know, allegedly, this could have set some boys off to go after Noah, including Jack. This would explain why Noah, in a state of panic, took Kay's shoe and possibly mistook it for his own. And you know, if you're going to run away, you're going to want shoes on to run fast. After their altercation, Jack could have pursued Noah, either after he attempted to take the ATV or in a fit of anger because he flipped the ATV, and that might have been the last straw. A blow to Noah's head with the golf club could have incapacitated him, which would explain the lack of defense wounds. So he had a head trauma so severe he couldn't fight back. The altercation might have escalated quickly, resulting in Noah's death. It's rumoured that after Noah's disappearance, Avery and Carter were yelling on the porch, with Avery questioning why Noah was allowed to leave. It's hard to know exactly if this is fact. What did they exactly say? We don't really know yet. What exactly happened to Noah after 3 a.m? Jack had messaged Justin Roy stating that Noah passed away around 4 a.m. Nobody knew that information. Only the coroner and LE should know that information, and it was not even public. It's never been publicised, an exact time frame that Noah passed away. It has been stated that Jack's phone was pinging around Noah's body around that time, as well as somebody else's phone, which is really interesting considering he said that he was asleep all night, and the fact that he's messaged Justin Roy stating there was no traffic around the time that Noah had passed away, and when the 911 calls were made, it makes you wonder how he knows that, considering also that he has been claiming that there has been a hit and run, and stating that he wasn't beat up. Interestingly, someone posted on Facebook stating that one of their friends said she was on her way to work that morning and seen a side-by-side pass her on the highway around 5 a.m. I've heard other accounts that it was exactly 4:48 a.m. and she remembers this because it came out of nowhere and scared the crap out of her. In conclusion, several factors in Noah's case raised serious concerns about evidence tampering and potential foul play. Belongings missing, you have his body and clothing and teeth being tampered with, you have a potential weapon that's gone missing, you have adults removing beer and guns from the party, you have kids factory resetting their phones, you have vehicles including Jack's truck and possibly his ATV were also quickly put up for sale or traded shortly after Noah's death. Were they involved in some way in transporting him down the highway? The early knowledge Jack shared about Noah's time of death, discrepancies in his statements about his whereabouts, and the bleaching scent detected by Noah's family at the party house all add to this mystery. The reluctance to conduct a thorough search of the party property, along with the insistence by Jack, Avery, the party host, and others on a hit-and-run narrative despite evidence refuting it, complicates this case further. The lack of tyre marks, vehicle debris, blood spatter, and visible damage on Noah's shoes, which would typically occur in a vehicle accident, reinforces suspicions that his injuries were sustained through another means, meaning assault. The findings on Noah's body, the fixed lividity posteriorly, suggesting post-mortem repositioning, and the black asphalt-like material on his back, abrasions, all point to the possibility that his body was moved/dragged. These combined elements suggest that foul play may have occurred, potentially following a sequence of conflicts at the party where alcohol, jealousy, and anger escalated. Whether intentional or not, these actions by individuals present and the surrounding inconsistencies make it essential to continue pushing for an independent and thorough investigation to determine the true cause of Noah's tragic death. It's imperative that he and his family receive the justice that they deserve. Rest in peace, Noah.